Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to start our roundtable. We are going to have 15 minutes more, so we have more than 1 hour together till 4:30. I'm the editor of NIS, focusing on organizations' transformation. We are not specialized in cybersecurity, but I'm observing with a lot of interest the evolutions in all the organizations about these very topics. Our roundtable is going to focus on that topic. How do we manage NIS2 compliance and maintain it over time? We would like to talk with people who take care of this transformation and also people who live it in their own organizations. To start with, but I guess that all of you know the topic, NIS or NIS2, Network Information Security, is a directive based on what was included in NIS 1 and transposed in 2018. And of course, NIS 1 had led to lots of changes, and it was about 10 strategic sectors. And in France, for some 100 organizations, they had to, of course, declare incidents to the higher body in France. They had to take care of their risks. NIS 2 is scaling up everything. They have published, it was published, in December 2022 in the official journal of the European Union, which means very many sectors, in fact, are involved. If you look at the annexes to see whether you are involved or not, there are 18 sectors. So thousands of organizations are concerned if they have more than 50 workers, or their board of management, is if their turnover is more than 10 million euros. And it concerns, of course, different aspects of the supply chain, the digital supply chain. And this is why we are having this roundtable. The transposition in the national law has to be done by October at the latest, although there is some compliance deadline which is allowed, while the different organizations can adapt themselves. As a journalist in the press, the specialists have been talking about this matter for a long time. In 2024, it's as if everybody was discovering again this topic. There are articles again about NIS 2. Everything has become more urgent, far more urgent. The small question in France about the local authorities, local and regional authorities, with lots of lobbying, because it's going to be up to the French government to decide what these local and regional authorities should be involved. So there are some actions which are carried out, and these are being published in the different press. So after this small introduction, I'm pleased in order to discuss about this topic and to see how we can include our own business and the whole ecosystem around our businesses in this adventure of NIS 2, to talk with people who have to face this directly. So in this order, well, you are sitting here, a gentleman, Pierre-Marie Laure, Cybersecurity Director of Framatome, and then Sander Zeemaker, who is the Managing Director of Dyson Institute. Then we have David Murad Elmaki, and then Anthony Gonzalez, who is the RSSI of Nutrition and Health, and he's going to tell us, these are the brands which are known rather than health and food. What is interesting, actually, and to start this panel, of course, at the end of the session, we are going to answer your questions. If you have any question in the room, what is the difference between what will happen with your organization if NIS 2 is applied? What are the changes for your organizations with NIS 2? Can you say a few words about your area of responsibility and introduce your own organization if necessary, and tell us if there has been any recent evolution in the supply chain approach that you have to face? Pierre-Marie, would you like to start? Hello, yes. The Cybersecurity Director of the activities of command control of nuclear bodies, and before that I was cybersecurity director of the railway in France, and then for 18 years I was in the National Navy. I'm also a member of CESAR, and this is how I am here. Thank you very much for inviting me. The last interventions. Thank you very much for this interesting topic. Interesting, yes. Supply chain. Also, it's a novelty of NIS 2. So they bring new obligations, new constraints, and we ourselves, we are suppliers for nuclear plants, and we also have a supply chain because we do assemble equipment. So NIS 2 and the supply chain is the novelty of this regulation, and we have focused on that through the quality matters. We would do the audit of suppliers, and we would be also audited as a supplier ourselves. Today we are going to have constraints and also leverage effects to also embark cybersecurity at different levels. First of all, regulatory approach. We have to have a new approach of compliance, and then operational dimension through also targeted audits, and for architectures, intrusion tests, or configuration audits to see whether there is a compliance of a service. Because I would like to tell you that the service providers do not have to comply with NIS 2, but the service that they provide has to comply with NIS 2. And also they have to put in place the arrivals, departure process. They have to do the audits. So this is the operational part. And then there is another chapter, the human chapter, after this whole regulatory chapter and some operational constraints that I mentioned. Another chapter is the human chapter, to have small service providers, to make them aware, to do awareness raising for crisis management, and also to federate an ecosystem with all these service providers and suppliers. So yes, the dialogue with the third parties, because it's important. Yes, Sander, what is your vision of this topic? Could you also introduce the Dyson Institute, please?
Je n'ai pas pensé à le dire, mais vous avez...
I'm sorry, I forgot to say. You can hear in French or English, because a part of the conference is taking place in French, or another part in English. So you have headphones. Yes.
Thank you, Darian. I will continue in English for this purpose. I'm the managing director of Dyson Institute. We are a consulting company dedicated to focus on the managing board in the space of cyber risk governance. Besides that, I'm a research affiliate at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Cambridge, as well as an agenda contributor to the World Economic Forum in this space. We are dedicatedly focused on providing consultancy services, insights and knowledge to this space, and translating the technical dialogue around cyber risk management to the strategic non-technical dialogue. And in this, in this space, we observe basically three changes. It's about where do you govern cyber risk management, how do you focus on your supply chain, and we see changes in the collaboration. In this day and age, we are really dependent on technology, and companies are interconnected with each other. And this makes any impact in the field of cyber risk management very significant and has an impact not only in the technology space, but it affects your business, it affects your operations, it affects your financial space. And this makes this a board discussion. It will become a precondition for doing business in this day and age of technology. The second space what we observe is we need to understand what drives our business, what is critical technology in this space, how is it affected by threats, but also what are key suppliers to deliver our products and services. And we need to understand and assess that. With already a lot of work, what needs to be done, this is additional pressure on the organization, and everybody knows we have a lack of resources in that space. So we observe that how we are going to assess is going to be changed. Some of the organization will questionnaires, get insights about the state of their suppliers, assess it with the policies, and have a follow-up debate. But this is reactive and take time, and an adversary can do a lot. In this space, we see a second development, and that's basically that there are some companies providing an inside-out view with scans and ratings, and basically show what a near real-time status of the company is and how it will evolve about the time, but this is still looking back. And in the near future, we expect that simulation-added techniques will be added and try to simulate what will your supplier do in the future and how strong will their cyber risk management strategy be. This kind of technology, digital twin technology in the strategic space, will help you to have a forward-looking dialogue with your supplier and basically start to have the discussion. We think you need to improve in future because we're concerning that your strategy will not hold. What are you going to do about it today? And this may help to change your relationship. And that brings us to the third point. And that is basically how we are going to work together. The fact is that you need to have strong relations with your suppliers. The reason for that is cyber risk can have a significant impact on your company. And when your processes are going down, when your services are going down, what are you going to do to resolve them? Which of your suppliers are critical and need to help them to get your company back into that space? And this requires to rethink the collaboration. If you don't know and don't have good relations with your suppliers in good times, how are you going to find them when it's our bad times? And who do you need to talk to? You need to share knowledge, you need to collaborate, you need to do exercise to be prepared. NIS 2 is one changing thing. Security will not be an option anymore. It becomes mandatory if you're in that space.
Okay, effectivement.
Yes, this is the beginning of history, as you were saying, Sander, and about technological future, which is in front of us, actually. Murad, the interest of intercloud for the topic of this conference and about your area of work, do you see any changes? Yes, we see it. We see the change. Yes, you know that 5 years ago, for instance, or maybe a little bit more, we started seeing everybody having some appetite for solutions, and there were decisions in different organizations to move to cloud. We saw this. It means that there is an increase, a high increase of dependency towards the supply chain. It means also that this will increase naturally the surface of exposition to the risk. You are going to be far more exposed to risk. And NIS 2 is coming. We are waiting for the transposition. Since the regulation is going to allow the regulatory body in France to apply sanctions, so we should do the same as the GDPR. That is to say, there will be sanctions, and I come back to what was said by Sander. Security is not going to be any luxury. Everybody has to set up necessary measures, or at least have a continuous improvement approach, where the whole set of measures which will happen after NIS 2, there are different requirements that the businesses and the different actors have to set up in order to decrease the risks, to minimize them. As to the cloud, What is our position between the customers and the different clouds at the world scale? We see these dependencies. These are increasing, and of course, the risks are going to increase as well. And it means that the data and applications of our customers are exposed to higher risk. So NIS 2 is something extremely important, and we do know that we have to comply with this. It will be some time. It's going to be the same with the GDPR. And as to us, we are going to provide support to our customers to show them the road to get adapted and also to adopt the law in a more simpler way. David, could you explain your organization and share us your vision about the changes which will be led by NIS 2?
Before I talk about BSI and our role, for me, the news isn't NIS 2. NIS 2 is a regulation that's there for a reason. And as Morab was saying, the news here is not just about the change and the massive increase in uptake of digital services and the increased risk that comes of that. There's been a fundamental shift in cybercrime, actively targeting things like the digital supply chain, which is why the supply chain is now so critical. Before, the story used to be, if you protect all your own information, and the bad guys want to come after you, they'll go through the weakest link, and that might be your supplier. Now, with that explosion of that shift to as a service and cloud-based services now, the bad actors are actively targeting that supply chain, because every time they hit that supply chain, they don't hit one company or even 10 companies. It can be 100 or 1,000 in one go. So NIS 2 is purely a reaction to that huge change in dependency on that supply chain that happened very, very quickly. A lot of organizations moved during pandemic. They had to move to survive. And what we're seeing now is they're only just starting to come up to speed with the issues and the risks about that huge shift. So this isn't about, for me, about, oh, we need to comply with NIS 2. It's about we need to respond to the new environment in which we're working. And NIS 2 is that prompt and that kick to actually get us to do that. And that focus on supply chain, I really welcome, as that, for me, is the single biggest area of risk in the digital space that most organizations are facing. At BSI, we write and shape best practice, the global best practice for information security, cybersecurity and privacy protection, 27001 ISO standard, started off as a British standard. We also provide training, assessment, and certification to organizations all the way around the world. So the other key issue here for us, I mean, we see organizations coming to terms with this. We see governments trying to come to terms with this all around the world. So we have to consider NIS 2 in that global perspective, because most of our supply chains are very, very difficult to see. They're certainly not within our national boundaries, and quite often they're not within our regional boundaries either. And so we have to consider NIS 2 as a prompt for responsible behavior to ensure we get the benefits of these digital technologies and digital services without taking undue risk.
Effectivement, on reviendra.
Yes, we will come back to compliance. Compliance is not only is not necessarily security. Anthony, what about you for this first roundtable? Yes. What is your opinion? What is nutrition et santé? Food, nutrition, and health. Maybe the French people will know the brands, but they don't know the name. Hello, good afternoon. I work in nutrition et santé, where you have the brand Gerblé, everybody, and Isostar is also another brand. So we work in the food sector based in Europe, and we have a pharmaceutical group based in Japan, which is called Otsuka. They are the shareholders. Yes, the supply chain for us as a company working in food, yes, it is part of our activities. And for service providing or raw material, the supply is important. I come back to raw material. aspect.
With a provider, a raw material provider. Well, because the cybersecurity attitude of a third party who provides a specific packaging for which they have a monopoly, if this provider is attacked, our production would be blocked. So we wouldn't be able to deliver our products. As far as service provision is concerned, we haven't waited for an NIS 2. We have due diligence measures when we do the call for tender. We have a lot of small providers, and we can't have the same attitudes towards a smaller or a bigger provider. I'm convinced that we have to address and we have to work with all the players, small or bigger ones. So we try and raise the awareness of these smaller players with the idea that we want to share security. We try and have them understand that it's important to apply security measures that are simple and basic, just common sense, and to have, through this shared security, a reinforced trust for the whole supply chain. And we will probably come back on this. Through this dialogue, we will have these concepts and principles of cybersecurity enter these smaller companies and adopted by them. To go on with the discussion, maybe we can discuss something for ISSMs. How do you perceive regulatory changes? Do you think it is important in your daily work? And what are, according to you, the top messages you have to convey within your companies? I don't know who would like to answer. Yes. To come back to this, we have to come back. The last barometer of CESA says that 1 company out of 2 was a victim of a cyber attack. So our leaders are convinced this risk exists. It is part of the company strategies today. The idea to adapt and the fact that you say we haven't waited the regulation to take this cyber risk into account, well, this is absolutely fundamental. And we come back to what we said earlier on. If you only see it through compliance, it's not correct. This regulation will aim at serving the company's business and reinforce its resilience. So it's up to us to present it this way, not to explain it as a constraint. GDPR was conceived as constraints, and it was a mistake. So we have to have a dialogue to transform this regulation into an opportunity. We won't have to be compliant as from October 24. That's not the philosophy of the text. Pierre-Marie, in relation to the message you want to convey internally? Very honestly, we are in critical activities, so we have a certain number of constraints, cybersecurity culture, which are strong in the company. So honestly, I don't think it will be a revolution in our company. It might increase the awareness raising of the providers, who will know better what we talk about when we suggest awareness raising constraints, or if we ask them, if we require more constraints. I think in my field, it won't be a revolution. Mourad, as an ISSM, actually, I would like to come back on one thing. The ultimate target of NIS2 is to have a European space where business can prosper. The European Commissioner prepared this regulation so that all the businesses in Europe be able to work in a secure environment. It won't be 100% secure, but to put in place the different measures so that the businesses can prosper. Will NIS 2 change for intercloud? Yes. The reason is very simple. The whole of the providers who are part of our supply chain will have to abide by this regulation. Automatically, we will have to do due diligence. There will be a change in NIS2 in the businesses and in all the ecosystem. But to come back to the other part of your question regarding the message that we try and convey within intercloud, there's an expression I like. Control, confidence. Trust doesn't exclude control. Trust doesn't exclude control. And that's what I try to say when I speak with our partners. Of course, we need this trust so that business can prosper. We need trust to have a sound environment for creativity and improvement of everything which is related to business can prosper. On the other hand, control is necessary, and I say it relentlessly within intercloud and with our partners. It is necessary to avoid any breach of the confidence. If you have a look at all the NIS2 requirements, and if you have a look at all the frameworks that already exist, you realize that there is an utter need to put in place an A baseline to have this trust and security. Security won't be 100% because attackers are here. Our adversaries do not have change management processes. So the idea is to work on that and try and improve our abilities to respond. That's something we will discuss during next questions. So that's the position of intercloud. Of course, we can see if there are leverages, tools that can help in the framework of this transition. David?
From our perspective, we look at the requirements within NIS2, and they are largely based on well-proven, established information security management processes and controls that have been around for decades. So it's easy for BSI to say that because, you know, yes, we wrote a lot of the stuff that now forms the heart of this. So for us, it's very familiar. So for us, we see NIS2 not as something that's new and something to be scared of, but something that says it's just pointing you at what already exists in global best practice. So the message, the internal message for me needs to be, we need to make sure we're doing the right thing, we are following best practice. When you look at how to comply with regulation, I've got to be very, very careful exactly how I phrase this here, but it can be very daunting to think, is this right? Is this the right thing to do? And that's why for us then, looking at what global best practice in this area actually means, it's been proven for many years and actually just gone through a very, very timely update to reflect this new area. This is a perfect tool really to help you. And there's plenty of information and guidance and the standard itself and training. You know, where you want to, how far you want to go with this tool will depend on your business and your business risk. And I think that's the other key internal thing here. Particularly if we look at GDPR as a comparison, what we're looking at here is a pragmatic risk-based approach. Are you going to be able to manage every single one of those 10 requirements to every single level with every single supplier you have? Probably not. So taking a pragmatic and risk-based approach and having that risk assessment is the other key tool, I would say, that organizations need to engage with. And that, going back to the previous question about the message, is positive engagement now is the key thing here. You can stick your head in the sand and pretend it's not going to happen, it won't go away. You can throw your arms in the air and complain, it's not going to go away. So positive engagement, and that's what the regulators, I think, are looking to see. One thing I would say is if you look at us sitting here in the panel, and to a certain extent, you guys in the room probably aren't really the target of the regulation. The fact that you're here, you're interested and engaged, is great. And we've saying here that the internal message isn't a problem. For a lot of organizations out there, the internal message is a big problem. There are a lot of organizations that are way behind. It's great to see that some organizations involved in sectors such as food, this kind of thing as well, are proactive, because all too often I've seen in some of the sectors that now come into scope, they are way behind. And the words that we've heard here are fantastic, but for many organizations, that's still a big challenge. So we have to see that within the whole scope of where NIS2 has expanded its aims, there are different internal messages needed for different organizations. I would suggest for the kind of organizations here, NIS2 isn't something to be frightened of, it's getting there, engage with it positively. For a lot of other organizations, it really is a wake-up call. I think there's a lot more education and awareness that needs to be done.
Sanders, vous voulez rajouter quelque chose sur les messages et les outils qui peuvent...
Do you want to add something on the messages and the tools that could be used?
Yes, I want to make a small add-on, partly echoing and partly adding to the conversation. I think an important part of NIS2 is basically formalizing what ought to be done. I found it is a really strong focus on duty of care and what was already said about trust. And how do you trust someone? Yeah, you trust someone if they say what they are doing. They try to do their utmost best to secure their organization and their service product delivery. But sometimes when they have a problem and they say, hey, can you help me? And this is not a one-time effort. When you're set to comply to NIS2, this is a ticket to write, but you need to reassess because the world is changing, your organization is changing, your collaboration is changing. So over time, you need to rethink, am I still in sync with what we should be doing? So it is part of reconsidering and reassess if everything works as intended. And that is the conversation you want to have. Yeah, and in terms of tooling, I already said we have 3 ways of working. We have a way of doing assessments and interviews. We have automated inside-out views, and a third part is using virtual digital twin technology to do simulation and explore how the value chain will evolve.
Merci. J'aimerais justement poursuivre sur la conversation.
I would like to come back on the discussion you just mentioned that was also mentioned by Anthony in his intervention, i.e. the need of quality dialogue beyond what happens in the perimeter of the company or the organization. Some organizations may be very mature, but how to embark the ecosystem in the system and how to reinforce the resilience of the whole chain. Anthony, I would like you to come back on how your providers react to these changes and how do you address them to come back on the issue of trust. Well, we have 3 categories. First, those who say, well, NIS 2, we studied it, we anticipated it, we try and understand, we try and set up an action plan. And I come back on the risk analysis part, which is the basic. No tool will be indispensable, but mastering your risks and putting it in the right activities of the company. To come back to the notion of providers and subcontractors, 3, those who prepare, those who wait for the 2024 top, there has been no transposition, and those who say, well, I don't live in Nice, making a word play there. So what we witnessed with providers, but also raw material providers, we see that it's a topic that is, generally speaking, anticipated because it doesn't revolution the cybersecurity, but it's just pointing what ISSMs try and express to their CEOs. Leaders of organizations have to take everything into consideration. What we are interested in is companies who are medium-sized, who do not have much expertise internally, and we try to support them through a cooperation. It's the DNA of nutrition and santé. The idea is to work over several years, and we try and guide them. We talked about ISO certifications. Of course, it's one of the criteria, but you're not set aside if you do not abide by this. But it's a good basis. It shows an involvement of the CEO to take on board cybersecurity and to put value on these aspects. As far as small providers are concerned, we use best practices. We try and explain them the biases there can be with staff. So something very important. As far as awareness raising is concerned, I would like to come back on this, saying, well, I hear very often we tried everything as far as awareness is concerned, but the advantage is something you do in the long run. If you make a campaign, well, 2 years afterwards, you will have to do it again. It's one of the fields, from my point of view, in which you have to invest as much as possible. That's one of the advice I often provide with SMEs. Please raise the awareness of your staff, make comparisons to try and embark them. So that's how we envisage our providers, subcontractors.
I think that's a fantastic approach to take in general with your supply chain. But you will find, particularly in the increased number of digital services that we use, there's going to be organizations that are either too big, too distant, and very, very difficult to engage with like this. And this is where we start to move towards a business decision here, because a lot of these services are very cost effective, they're very agile, and from a business perspective, they're fantastic. But if you're not able to engage with them in the way that Anthony was just mentioning, and they're not engaging on NIS 2, what do you do? And I think it's a very important point to be open about here is some of these services is going to become a business decision. It's not going to be a technical, an ICT, a cybersecurity decision. We just can't get anywhere with these guys. What can we do? It's something that needs to be elevated to the board level here. This is a business risk. This company provides us with fantastic, cost-effective, agile services, but they're too big to listen, too distant to listen, and we're potentially exposed here. This now becomes a business risk, not a technical risk. It's very, very important, I think, that we realise there's going to be a scale. There's those who engage completely, those who maybe need encouragement, as you say, and help, but there are going to be those that fundamentally don't. And then it's going to have to be a business decision about how you manage that risk. So I think that for me, is one really key point to be open about here.
Pierre-Marie, vous retrouvez dans...
Yes. Do you agree with Anthony about the level of maturity of suppliers? Yes, yes. To come back to the quality of the dialogue that you were mentioning earlier on, there are different approaches. It's a formal one, as I was saying, through audits, through facts, more formal one. There can be a soft power approach also, and this can be awareness raising. You say so, but it requires a whole work, a permanent work, and you have very many different stakeholders, and there are big ones, for example, the legal aspect, the contract manager, the insurance company, the buyers. So there are a whole set of stakeholders to embark. Another way of reinforcing the quality of the dialogue, it could be through the crisis management, just to get trained to manage your risk. It's not very expensive. It means lots of being very humble. It means having willingness. It means awareness raising. So to do an exercise for managing the risk, not only in the cyberspace, but to embarking all these people in your company and also with your supply chain. This is an important leverage. And also, it would mean to set up workshops on an annual basis with your main suppliers and also to share the concerns of all. There could be different levels of dialogue. And you have to look at this according to NIS 2. This is a progressive approaches between the important entities and the essential entities. It depends on the sector activity, the number of workers, and the you have this progressive approach, and the core is not going to be the same for an important or substantial business. Maybe the hygiene may be based on the continuity of the activity. But for an essential entity, it means risk analysis. Risk analysis, the way you see it, about EBIOS method, we are going to focus on the critical stakeholders. And among them, you have the suppliers. We are going to have this refined approach. We are going to do certification of systems and also the management of all the lists of people. If there are interconnections, what are the procedures and the crisis management and also the control of the third parties? Do we have the same reality in the cloud and digital ecosystem? Murat? Yes, totally. Yes, absolutely. Yes, we agree with Anthony about all these different categories. We have this on a daily basis. And the use case mentioned by Pierre-Marie, there is one element that we should not forget. When we have to answer, to respond this kind of regulation or any other framework, there are technical approaches, there are organization-based approaches, there are different approaches. So then we have to have different kind of measures when you want to certify 27,000 framework or SOC 2. I would like just to focus on the technical part, on the technical dimension. I think that most of the points were mentioned by you, Pierre-Marie. Different tools to have the whole ecosystem to be safe, including the supply chain, because they take care, all of them, for designing this safety parameter. At NIS 2, we have to cover or to use the services coming from the supply chain. When I talk about the technical dimension, there is a buzzword which is used during the last months is zero trust. Each one has their own understanding. There are different implementations, different philosophies, different schools, different understanding. You always have to come back to the basic needs, to the baseline, and to apply a need, very simple one, that is to say, the need to know. And we have to set up area segmentation to use protocols, advanced protocols such as Cyan that can be used also in the framework of the different discussion, technical ones with the supply chain. Of course, another point was mentioned by Anthony and Pierre-Marie and David. This is something which is extremely important. It's a recurrent work, and I think that even the national education should take this into consideration. There should be small courses to our children. It should be part of the school curriculum to prepare them to their professional life and to avoid for people to use lots of energy to make them aware, while they could have done this before. A small remark, I would like to come back to one point mentioned by David about the fact that, and this is a use case that we do have, we have businesses who do not have anybody who takes care of their security. They can have very sensitive services, and we cannot not use them. We must use them. So the idea is very simple. Let's come back to the basic elements, to the exercise for risk management, and try to transfer the risk or to minimize it according to the means that we have in our hands. It doesn't mean at all that you should exclude these businesses. This is part of the economic group, the economic cloth of the country. You have to provide them support for them to be mature for the security. Thank you very much for this focus, because a major part of the problem is they are part of this critical value chain for the bigger businesses. Sander, would you like to add something? What about compliance to do security with the third parties?
Well, I think there's already said a lot, but I think really something what is going to rethink how we are going to collaborate. If you have a small entity critical to your organization that cannot afford the security needs you have. I had one client in my portfolio, and they basically started to share security services of them to that particular small company and leverage their security posture. In a way, it was secure for both companies. And this was a whole new way of thinking how you collaborate and how you should do business. And this might be an example just to rethink what you can do and how it involves business decisions. And second element, what is really important, is when you look at the NIS 2 regulation, you have duty of care, you have a reporting part, but you also need to be ready. You need to have plans in place when you have problems in your organization. And then it's the question, what do you do to train them? And it's not training within the value chain and on an operational level, but did you do a cyber range exercise at the board level? Because when you have a problem, a lot of dimensions will be impacted. You need to organize across the whole organization, engage with your stakeholders, your customers, see if alternative processes and services delivery become in place. That is huge. And usually people think they are ready, but when it comes to problems, you always see that you're missing some of the spots. And this is really critical to do those exercises.
Peut-être effectivement, on pourrait faire un...
Yes, maybe a round table about the piece of advice that you would provide to a service provider, to the supplier, one item that they should be very careful, vigilant, that one point that you would like them to, that you would like to draw their attention. Maybe it could inspire others to imitate you, Anthony. Access, strong authentication. I think that this should be really very important. We should not wonder about this anymore. There are too many service businesses that say why they don't set this up, because it bothers the users, etc. Today, the question is whether the MFA is resistant to attacks. I'm not even talking about organizations who do not have activated MF. For example, hospitals in France, mainly, very often this happens through a lack of authentication. I would like to come back to what Pierre-Marie was saying about exercise, to raise awareness, to embark the COMEX on simulation of crisis. The cyber is a crisis like another one. And to do simulation exercises each year, every 2 years, to be humble, of course, in the cyber dimension, we should get prepared. We have to identify the proper people. We have procedure. We have to ask ourselves the proper questions, to update the emergency lists, and maybe to have another possibility to use another kind of way of sending messages. It should be adapted to the organization, with very small companies or SMEs. David, would you like to share a piece of advice?
Yeah, thank you. In some ways, I would like to talk about the best practice, but I've kind of gone on about that, and that's our kind of core thing. The one thing I want to mention that hasn't really been talked about today is in depth, I think is probably the most risky area when it comes to NIS2, is around the vulnerability and incident disclosure. This is where everything we've talked about your relationships with your supply chain come to a real head. Very few organizations are completely vertical around a particular issue where you end up with a software or web-based vulnerability or incident. You're going to be very dependent on your supply chain. So if there's suddenly a mandate to report in a fixed time frame, it's not going to be down to your organization. It's going to be down with your relationships with your supply chain around that vulnerability and disclosure and vulnerability and incident disclosure. So that's coming in as part of NIS2. And yes, there's the 10 general requirements, but that particular one, I think, is one that a lot of organizations are going to struggle with, and where they really need to work out who in their supply chain is going to come into play when if we do have an incident, and making sure that your relationships and the whole of that management and the whole of those requirements of that reporting are passed down, and your relationship can manage that. That, I think, is one area where I think a lot of organizations, from everything on that list, that's the one area I think they will really struggle.
Merci. On poursuit le tour de table, Mourad. Je dirais...
I would say what would be interesting for these businesses to have a permanent approach for improving, to have a kind of benchmarking. There are very many of them. To have it, to have motivation, to motivate their teams, and to work on it, to have deadlines, and mainly to have this permanent approach for improving. You cannot be 100% safe. The attackers are listening. They are going to attack. They are going to try to recover your information of your business. And this was mentioned by Anthony and Pierre-Marie, you should have exercises, crisis exercise. It's not an approach of 10 years ago. You say, okay, we could have a CapEx, and it's going to be very simple for our teams. No problem, we can sleep. This is not the case anymore. Even if you have the maximum level of CapEx, the attackers are very determined. They are going to find means in order to enter your information system. So the teams have to be trained, prepared very well, and to have this reflex, they have to answer to respond to these incidents. If I don't have incidents today, it's tomorrow. So there is a need to prepare people in their minds and the teams to really become defenders against these adversaries. So permanent improvement, and they have to be all the time improved, all the time on a permanent basis. Therefore, they can improve their level of security in these businesses. Sander?
I think one important element is to consider is you don't compete on security. If you have, be open in the supply chain. If you have a need for help, ask and see where you can collaborate. If you have insights that are really important for vulnerabilities of potential attacks, share it within the community. And if someone is reaching out to you in the supply chain that asks for help, help that organization or person, because it's a collaborative effort, and this might change. And maybe some parts where it comes to the legal part, where they say the secret you don't want to share, this will be an internal discussion. But I think this needs to change if you want to secure your processes in a collaborative way.
Oui, ça marche assez mal.
Yes, it doesn't work if you are alone for cybersecurity. It's a collective game somehow. Yes? Yes, for the different solutions. After what has been mentioned, to manage the vulnerability, the MFA, training, exercises, I have experienced that. You have to have a confidentiality policy. It's a very good exercise. It's not based on technology. You have to do very rapid risk assessment, for example, RRA, rapid risk assessment, RRA. In a workshop, you have 30 minutes. It's based on data, on the value chain. It can be very rapid, very concrete, very pragmatic. And having a confidentiality policy doesn't mean it's 1, 2, 3, 0 and be different. No, you have to think about the value chain and to think about your data and where you are going to accommodate them through technological tools. But I think that it's important to think about your own data. We still have some minutes. We can have questions. Do you have questions? I have questions myself. I'm going to give you the microphone because the interpreters need to hear the speakers. A cybersecurity consultant. I provide consultancy, and I thought that you were rather shy. You talk about awareness raising. You think it's a very kind word. You talk about auditing. This is rather more serious than awareness raising, but you have not talked about a contract with your suppliers. You have not talked about PAS, PAQ, PAQS. You talked about NIS, but there are public elements, civil code. You have to repair the damage that you have provoked to other people. Even if there is negligence, you have to prepare this, and you have to take care, for example, the suppliers of a business, or even if you have to take care of damages carried out by your own children. There is a whole the contract part has missed. And awareness raising, yes, it is necessary, but it's rather weak for me.
Je peux apporter, oui. Merci pour votre question. Effectivement, les PAS, donc plan d'assurance sécurité, les PAQ, plan d'assurance qualité, donc comme je mentionnais tout à l'heure, il y a déjà une dimension qualité qui existe déjà, et la dimension également, les PAS sont systématiques, en tout cas dans notre secteur d'activité. Mais vous avez raison de le souligner, parce que s'il y a deux éléments qui vont être transposés dans la directive NIS 2 vers le droit français, c'est certainement l'impératif de maîtrise de son écosystème, de la cartographie. D'ailleurs, cartographie, c'est un terme qu'on a beaucoup entendu dans cette édition du FIC. Donc, maîtriser ses interconnexions, sa cartographie, son écosystème. Et le deuxième point, c'est ce que vous mentionniez, monsieur, avec la prise en compte dans les contrats. Tout à fait.
Anthony, sur la partie contractuelle vis-à-vis de vos fournisseurs, c'est traité comment?
Alors, c'est une très bonne remarque. La partie contractuelle, elle doit être abordée, mais je le vois plus comme un contrôle administratif et a posteriori. Donc, il y a deux temps. Il y a la partie en amont, la partie contractualisation, parce qu'au final, on va activer et rendre opposable une clause, un contrat ou, par exemple, une clause d'auditabilité, ce qui nous arrive très fréquemment. Voilà, je pense que ça va avec la partie en amont, la partie contractualisation, je me protège contractuellement, mais c'est pas ce qui va faire ce travail de fond. Donc, encore une fois, je le vois comme un contrôle administratif, plutôt a posteriori, qui apparaîtra lorsque on aura besoin, on sera en désaccord avec le tiers, soit lorsqu'on sera en litige.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions ou remarques dans la salle? Vous aurez sans doute l'occasion d'en discuter.
On pourra en reparler, je ne suis pas sûr que ça passionne.
Juste rebondir sur votre question. Bon, déjà, merci pour votre question. Nous avions bien évoqué à maintes reprises l'analyse de risque. Et donc, dans l'analyse de risque, il y a bien en fait un traitement de risque qui va s'en suivre. Et justement, le but, c'est soit de le minimiser ou de le transférer. Il se trouve que justement, la partie légale, contractuelle, elle fait partie de cette analyse de risque. Donc, bien que ça n'a pas été mentionné clairement, ça faisait partie justement des points évoqués. Donc c'est quelque chose de très important, bien évidemment, et c'est quelque chose qu'il faudrait prendre au sérieux, et donc c'est quelque chose à mon niveau, qu'on met déjà en place et qu'on suit rigoureusement.
Pas d'autres questions? Moi, ça m'évoque juste un...
Sorry, I was on the French channel. I hope you could hear what it was just said. Okay, I had an exchange with other ISSMs, audits, questionnaires to the providers. The fact that some of them in some smaller sectors can be providers of several big companies. And if they all reinforce on each separately their practices, well, it may be quite difficult to meet the different requirements from the smaller companies. Would there be an interest in a coordination between bigger companies, at least in the form, in order to make these smaller providers' life easier and avoid, if I simplify a little bit, if they just spend their time answering your requirements or meeting your requirements and then these of other companies?
Great point, and there's a great opportunity, I think, for industry to take a lead here. And I think BSI as an organisation, certainly I'm thinking we need to be more proactive in helping that. The one thing is, though, there's never going to be a simple checklist. You do this and you're NIS2 compliant. There's always going to need to be a certain element of a kind of a subjective and approach needed, and an individual approach needed. And I think what we can do potentially is streamline ways of demonstrating conformance with the requirements that could be relatively generic. And that's certainly something that we're hearing from our clients over the last couple of days, actually, and certainly something I think we're going to be very actively looking to do. But I think one thing we must say is this is not a tick box exercise to just go and think, okay, I can tick these 10 things and now I'm done. This needs to be considered as a fundamental change in the approach to cybersecurity within an organization and how to embrace that. So I think there is absolutely a route forward for doing some things to simplify for industry, and certainly at BSI I can say we absolutely intend to take this forward with our clients right now. It's been probably the biggest takeaway from this whole event for me in the last few days. But just to remind that with what we can't do is I've ticked these boxes, therefore I'm okay. So there's a balance to be taken here, I think. But we certainly intend to be taking a lead on that.
Oui, Sander.
I would like to add something to the conversation. I think it's not only the industry that needs to take a lead. I think also from a government perspective and more often from an international field, we need to see if we comply to NIS 2, what does it allow us to apply to other regulation? It is a lot of regulation in different countries with different perspectives, with different objectives, but at the end of the day, we want to secure society. And I think this is another dialogue that needs to be shaped. It will be a long dialogue and it's not solved today or tomorrow, but the conversation needs to be started.
Absolutely, and I'll just say we're doing the same thing ourselves. So me personally, working with governments around the world, we're seeing more and more regulation, and AI is another one where we're seeing suddenly an explosion in different regulations, and we, as BSI, are working to bring governments together. One really important point here is cybercrime has no boundaries. And the more boundaries and different regulations we build ourselves, we're playing into their hands. So the more we can streamline, you're absolutely right. But bearing in mind the practical timescales and the issues with influencing governments, industry can still take a lead to improve things amongst ourselves as well. But you're absolutely right. I was presenting at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and there were a whole range of governments there talking around their new policies around supply chain management and cybersecurity. That was my message. You know, cybercrime is the third biggest economy in the world, united in one way, no boundaries. And here we are now presenting on how each country is doing something different. So totally support that, and it's something we're working on. But we need to be working on something that's going to help people in this room by October of this year, which means we have to work together and come up with some practical frameworks in the short term as well.
Et quant aux mesures à appliquer justement pour minimiser le risque,
to mitigate risk, we should try and position things according to the assets. In some cases, you're going to work with providers who have core services and sometimes not. So we have to position the requirements rightly, because there will be several aspects to mitigate these risks. So there will be technical approaches such as audits or pen tests, for instance, or solutions such as ASM or attack surface management, for instance. And then we will have to see how far we will go with the requirements. Shall we have access to information within the provider system? But this can only be done if we come back to the basics and we make the inventory of the assets. It's a process which is important for the company, and according to that, we will apply the adequate measures to the situation. Someone told me that NIS 2 was not only a regulation, it was also an opportunity to build a collective cybersecurity and to think out of the box about information sharing, practice sharing, and to have it and to make it go out of a closed perimeter. Maybe a last conclusion for each of you. if there is one message you want our public to remember. Thank you so much for this topic. NIS2 will come before October 24 in French legislation. 58% of companies in France are involved in this supply chain topic, who forces us to think out of the box. You know that Target, which is a compromise that affected a big American company, distribution company, compromission comes from air conditioning. That it was a problem for this company. I have nothing against this company, but we have to think out of the box. Sander?
What I want to give the audience is, one, cyber risk management enters the board, so you need to have a discussion from a business, operational and financial perspective, how it can impact the organization. Second element is there are several ways how you can assess your supplier and corporate landscape. But you need, whatever you assess, you need to continuously assess it, because the world is going to change. And the third element is you need to rethink how you are going to collaborate, not only in the good times, but also in the bad times, and how you can help, share and learn from each other.
De façon très succincte.
Very. Trust does not exclude control. Many monitoring measures are important, internally, externally, a control of the whole ecosystem. That's what I think.
As I said at the outset, the news here isn't NIS2. The news here is the risks to your business have fundamentally changed, and this is a wake-up call to engage with this positively to ensure that your business is suitably leveraged to capitalize on the fantastic benefits digital technologies can bring without exposing yourselves to the risks of the third biggest economy in the world, cybercrime.
Alors pour conclure.
To conclude, I would say that through NIS2, as we saw, well, you do not have to see it through the compliance angle. Nothing is new in terms of risk. We see that cyber risk is part of the top 3 or top 5 of the risks in for top managers. I think that this implementation should be adapted to all organizations, and the mindset of the French regulator, the philosophy is not to be very strong on people who would not be compliant in October 24. This directive should be seen as an officialization of the cyber risk as a strategic risk for all the actors in Europe and in France. Thank you so much to all of you for for this discussion. Thank you to the public. Thank you so much. And don't hesitate to discuss with our speakers if you have more precise questions to ask them.